I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传是一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
As always, good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever it is you happen to be today. And welcome to another installment of our online Tao study group. It's a joy to see everyone here again. This is one of the things I look forward to every week, actually. It's kind of the end and beginning of a week for me. I prepare my talks, primarily do most of the writing over the weekends and start my week on Sunday with this. Today I'm not really delving into anything in particular from the Tao Te Ching or any of the stories, but rather just compiling some thoughts on moderation. I've been spending a fair amount of time considering the origins of where we come from and the source of the teachings and the source of everything that exists around us, and then kind of re-examining life in general and those sorts of things. I guess those situations arise from time to time, and with change and with the movement of the seasons and the growing of the kids and all of the other stuff that happens around me. I find myself from time to time considering the whys and wherefores and how-tos of all of this fun stuff. This arose out of that thought process and out of some of the stories from Chuangzi and the teachings in the Tao Te Ching. It crosses my mind fairly frequently that there very often is a perceived, rather impassable chasm in thought between spiritual refinement and secular success. That is, a lot of people tend to believe that in order to achieve a high degree of spiritual refinement and hopefully one day enlightenment, that it's somehow necessary to eschew secular success in this life, that the accumulation of material wealth is somehow connected to the darker, more evil processes at work in the universe, if you will. And I want to dispel that myth, because nothing could be further from the truth. Secular success is not an evil in and of itself, and neither is money or the accumulation of stuff. Wealth and material possessions are not evil in and of themselves, and our desires and our attachments are not necessarily evil in and of themselves. Now, it's true, I do spend a fair amount of time talking about moderating and supplanting our desires and attachments, because all desires and attachments eventually bring suffering. But I always speak about those in terms of not eliminating all desires and attachments, but rather in wisely choosing the ones that we keep. The one that I use as an example most frequently is the attachment I have to my family. Those attachments will absolutely one day cause us suffering. One of these days, I'm going to die, and my passing will cause my family suffering. That attachment will be lost because I won't be here anymore in a physical sense, and so that there will be some suffering for a period of time. But the fact that suffering is going to occur doesn't mean that I'm willing to give up that attachment. Okay? I have chosen, wisely or otherwise, to maintain that attachment because I find it beneficial. So, at point here, the things that we accumulate by themselves, are not usually good or bad in and of themselves. Rather, the way that we use those things imparts a quality of goodness or badness, if you will, to them. In the final analysis, the things we accumulate very largely are simply tools to be applied in our existence. And the way in which we apply them and the way in which we view those things and their place in our lives are what create the connotation of good or evil surrounding those things. The other thing is that the effects on us of the acquisition or the effects on us of the absence of some of those things can impart a quality, if you will, of goodness or badness, for want of a better term, to those things and to our behavior. You know, if we place sufficient emphasis on the acquisition of an item, then we're no longer moderated. We're out there somewhere on the extremes, and that all by itself says that there's a problem, that there's something potentially wrong there. Okay. So what I think drives the perception of that goodness and badness is discontent. Yeah, right. Let's try that slow and in English. Is discontent and excessive desire. Those two things are also the primary causes of our suffering and an awful lot of our very own personal life disasters and calamities. It's important to remember and bear in mind that part of cultivating the Tao teachings implies putting secular success in its proper place alongside the path of spiritual refinement and enlightenment. And so the thought that somehow a spiritual life is signified by that severe self-denial and deprecation and want is absolutely not at all what the ancient sages had in mind. And if you examine the lives, for instance, of our ordained masters there at the temple, every one of them enjoys a very high degree of secular success, as well as a very high degree of spiritual refinement. Those two things coexist very simply and very easily with each other, which leads me to say that if we are cultivating the teachings properly, then we ought to be living joyous, fulfilling, successful lives with plenty of everything that we need, including the attribute of simplicity. Skillful living for us should encompass knowing when to let go, as well as when to accumulate or stock up, right? If we manage to save sufficient wealth, for instance, we now have the means to extend the reach of our help and assistance to others to a higher and farther degree than if we did not manage to save up that money, right? Or perhaps what it is we have an abundance of is not cash on hand, but some talent, some ability, some type of service that we can provide to another, and we have that abundantly. The more of that we are able to produce, the more of that we're able to stock up, the more of that we're able to provide, the more assistance we can extend to others. That's not at all a misguided or evil use of the accumulation of stuff and talents. That's a very right and appropriate use of those things. And one of the fundamental tenets of our teachings is that of taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. That's in every aspect of our lives. However, that being said, the concept of moderation goes hand in hand with that teaching on being successful so that we don't wind up sliding down the slope to one extreme set of behaviors or another. Moderation is that key concept in the balance of the secular spiritual scales that keeps our lives focused and centered and in balance. Simplicity in life, being rid of the complexities and the stress and anguish and all of the extreme emotions that come along with those things, is kind of the measure of how we're doing in a life lived in moderation. If we're continually worrying about what we have, what we don't have, or what we hope to have, we've not successfully moderated too well. And so with success in all things, both spiritual and secular being the goal, we have a pretty good way to judge how we're doing in terms of whether or not we're sticking to that center path. Moderation is how. Moderation isn't the elimination of all desires, attachments, and material wealth. It is the wise and skillful choice to maintain what's important to us and discard what isn't, and then to use what it is that we have appropriately. Moderation is the intentional avoidance of any sort of extreme or excess in our life. It is what is meant by walking that center path. And it is unbelievably important to us in the cultivation of the Tao teachings to remember those points as we attempt to sort out what is and is not appropriate for us. Once again, it's not a terrible thing to have some attachments and desires, but it can become a terrible thing to us when that becomes an obsession or a fixation or an extreme that causes us for us to not behave in an appropriate, forthright manner. So the better we become at avoiding the extremes, hopefully, obviously, the happier our lives become. Right? The closer to the center we're able to adhere, the less stress, the less anxiety, the less problems, and the less stuff we have to worry over. Also, the more attention we pay to simplifying and moderating, the happier our lives become. Why? Because we're not worrying about all of the stuff we don't have, all the stuff we thought we ought to have, or all the stuff we do have. We become content but not complacent, and understand the proper place of both the stuff, spiritual and secular. By doing that, we bring ourselves closer and closer to that center path where our lives become more balanced and more smooth, and as that happens, it becomes easier to get by in life. We find that our relationships function better, that we don't stress so much, that we don't worry so much. And the more of that we're able to do, the more joyous and peaceful life becomes, and the more joy and peace we can find. And kind of at the end of the day, isn't that really what it's about? Getting through this life with a minimum of stress and upheaval and a maximum of peace and joy and success? Never forget that moderation is a continuing process of evaluating and choosing what to keep and what to discard, too. It's a matter of always evaluating what's appropriate for us in any given moment and what is not. I found that to be an interesting thought. It isn't real involved or real complex or difficult to consider, but I notice as I look back over the years of my life that my attempts at moderation and uncluttering and simplifying have changed over the years. I find that the things that I hold dear have evolved with time, and that some of the things that I used to consider to be of vital importance over the years have ceased to maintain their luster. The older I get, the more I realize how important health and well-being and spiritual peace is, and how much less important all of the junk is. And I've finally gotten to the point where I can actually park 2 cars in my garage because I've gotten rid of all of the stuff out there that I didn't really need. Derek talks about this from time to time, where every year he goes out and gets rid of a whole bunch of stuff that he doesn't use anymore. And I started doing that some time ago as well. I have to confess, I had a really hard time with some of the old 3.5-inch floppies and some of the antique computers, but eventually they had to go. I'm not sure that they ever would have been worth anything as museum pieces, but as conversation pieces, some of them were pretty stellar. Unfortunately, they weren't doing me a lot of good holding my shelves up, and so eventually I had to get rid of them. What I found as I began to unclutter was that as the space became uncluttered, so did my mind. I'm not exactly sure how that process works, but it's kind of a neat process. And finally, I've gotten down to the point where what's out there is stuff that I actually use and need, and then I can put both cars in the garage. That's kind of a nifty thing. Didn't break my heart at all. And it was a happy event this winter because it really got cold here, and it was very nice to find my warm, unsnow-covered van in the garage in the mornings when I headed out to work. That was a really nifty little unanticipated benefit. And we all have to go through that process at some level. Moderation and learning to moderate is an essential component of Tao cultivation. It is. It absolutely is. If we don't learn to do it, we'll never progress past the point of wrestling the junk in our lives. You know, we talk very frequently about the apparent joy that I feel in my life. Derek brings it up from time to time. I hope you guys hear it in my voice and see it in my pictures and can realize the changes that have occurred in me over the years. And I'm going to tell you very honestly that going through this process has not always been easy, but it has resulted at every step of the way in an incremental increase in peace and joy and the reduction of stress and anxiety and problems and issues in my life that have been remarkably transformative. And most of them have occurred very quietly and almost imperceptibly over time. That's why I keep coming back to some of these topics repeatedly, is because I re-examine them over the years and realize in hindsight some of the things that happened that I couldn't necessarily see while the process was unfolding. This is one of those. And it was eye-opening enough that I really felt like I needed to talk about this and put these thoughts out there for you, so that perhaps you guys might look back across the years of your life as well and realize some of the same things. I believe with all of my heart right now that moderation is the base, it's the foundation on which a joyous and peaceful life rests. Moderation is the term that gets us from extremes of emotionalism, extremes of secularism, extremes of spiritualism, and there are extremes, and back to a functional center path that works. I believe with all of my heart that it is these teachings that help us find peace and joy and balance in life, where we don't have to consider secular success as somehow the root of all evil and something to be eschewed and avoided in the name and for the sacrifice of spirituality. That has never made any sense to me, even way before I'd ever heard of the Tao teachings. If any of you had the opportunity to go way south of the Mason-Dixon line, every now and again you'll drive past a a little tiny apostolic church located in a little tiny house in the middle of nowhere someplace, where parked around it is a bunch of 1973 Gremlins and a Pinto. And inside that building are 10 people who are jumping up and down and carrying on about how one of these days they're all going to be rich. And it never happens. And I've always wondered why. What it is that was missing from that path that prevented those folks from getting from point A to point B. Well, you know, if you embrace a path of want and lack and spiritual piety at the expense of secular well-being, that's where you wind up. And if that's really and truly what you believe is required for your spiritual salvation, far be it from me to tell you you can't do it. I'm not going to try to tell you what your truth is. But I've studied the scriptures for a long time. Old Testament, New Testament, Lao Tzu, the Quran. I've been involved in spirituality for almost as long as I've been alive, and nowhere in any of those scriptures have I ever found a verse that said that you had to live a life of complete austerity in order to be spiritually fulfilled. And so I believe, yet again, when we free ourselves from the ideation that success and a full life are not spiritual enough, then we can begin to use moderation to truly create the life we desire. I am very hopefully walking down that center path right now. My family's very comfortable. We have a great life, get along well with my wife. My kids love me. I love them. Our chosen careers are successful. And I think our paths of spiritual cultivation are pretty much on track. Still have a lot to learn, but I don't think that's ever likely to change. I think I'm always going to have a lot to learn, but I'm not unhappy with where it's going. And I'm very happy with the progress. And I can't think of a much better advertisement, if you will, for this particular path than that statement. And so I'm going to step out there just a tad and say that moderation is the beginning of wisdom, and it's a powerful, powerful tool in the cultivation of the Tao teachings. And I'd like to encourage all of you to think about that a bit this week and consider what it maybe can do for you in the upcoming weeks, months, and years. It's an absolute essential, and we'll all get there one day, one way or the other, I promise. But it's probably easier if we get there voluntarily. Thank you all so very much for letting me share with you. And as always, I sure hope something I said was helpful and useful to you. Thank you.
Bill, thank you for that wonderful presentation. Let me relay back to you some of the feedback that just came in. So a general remark from Bibi for our meeting overall is that she says, I'm so glad to be filled today to receive such a rich blessing. And then from Mike,
thank you.
Love Bill's talk. He makes you think. And I definitely think that's true. That is the purpose of the Tao, is to encourage that we all use the powerful mental faculties that we came into this world with. From BB once again, well said, wonderful words of wisdom. And from Tim, very good reminder, Bill. Thank you for the presentation. From Bob, Bill, I just returned from a week's trip visiting old friends that I have not seen in years. What was shocking was how extreme some of them have become. I spoke of moderation as a path leading to success and peace. Not many of them took it to heart. Thank you for the the reaffirmation.
I'm sorry that happened to you.
I think it's generally true in the path of Tao cultivation that when you begin on the path, perhaps years ago, perhaps recently, what will invariably happen is that you begin to diverge from the friends that you had before who have decided to not embark on the same path. So even if in the beginning the variance between yourself and them is relatively small and something that you can overcome, with some socializing, spending time together, over time though, it's definitely something that happens that the chasm, that the gap between you and your previous friends will become wider and more difficult to overcome. So that there may come a day when you find that, well, wait a minute, we used to think so much alike. Now we seem to be completely different. So if that were to happen, let me just tell everyone that it's perfectly normal. Unfortunately, life is all about evolving yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, and we all do that evolving at different rates, in different fashion, in different areas of our lives. So it may be too much to expect that the friends that you had before can synchronize with you as you seek to develop and grow yourself. So it's unfortunate, but the wonderful thing about life is that as you refine your own being in accordance with your own ideals and your vision, your dreams of what you can be, life will bring about new friends, new associations, people who suddenly find that they have more in common with you because of your elevated levels. So there's a loss in some of the older friendships that you might have had before, people that have not kept up, but there's also new connections that you can make as you progress forward. So yin and yang.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架深鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架各位顶传十一鞠躬，斜翻一鞠躬。Well done, everybody. Thank you so much.